Good evening, everybody. My name's Clyde Morgan. I'm doing Johnston chapter 9. Please bear with me as I am not real sure I understand this chapter. I'm redoing this as the video that I did last night apparently has a buffering issue. When I tried to view it, it didn't work, so I'm redoing it. Social life, chapter 9, Johnson. This section talked about social life. Jordan was a ABA worker, and Jordan was assigned to work with this 13-year-old boy, and Jordan saw that the boy had severe behavioral issues. Well, Jordan thought that because the boy had the behavioral issues, that it was because of his intellectual disability. But when Jordan went to do the home visit with the family, he realized that that wasn't the case. That the child um, was in a family unit to where the older and younger siblings engaged in the same behavior. There was a lot of violence, so to speak, for lack of a better word, in the home. So um, Jordan's idea of the family actually of the child actually having a learning disability was not necessarily the case anymore, because he realized that the family could have been doing things to show them to make the child to create a hostile environment. So and this was their culture. So basically, he was saying that this was a culture of hostility and aggression in the environment. Whereas Jordan thought because the child had a learning disability, it was just hard for him to learn to do things, and that was why um, he was having issues. But because the parents believed in corporal punishment, he felt like that increased the child's ability for violence. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't think that spanking a child for depending on the level of the behavior, I can't say that I think that would be wrong. And the way in which you do it determines uh, determines how that child would react, I think. Um, so that was that section. The next section is culture and culture-free contingencies. This section discusses how we as humans participate in contingencies that are somewhat under our skin. That's what I got from that. And dealing with our environment around us. So what I took that to mean is when you're out in the community from prior events, you kind of have an idea as to how things are going to happen. And if it was an uneasy event for you, then under the skin, you would start to feel the anxieties, the nervousness that I think would be accompanied with that. So therefore, you would have to you would feel those feelings, and I think that's part of being under the skin. And I think that's what he got from that, and it's all by the stimuli that's in the environment. It also talks about certain things like gravity and motion and natural phenomena that we can't avoid, but we can't avoid happening. But we, what I took it to mean is that we adjust what we do based on these phenomena. And what comes to mind recently is the storms that we've had. These storms have caused us to prepare for things in ways that we wouldn't do in everyday life. And because the first storm wasn't the magnitude that everybody had predicted it would be, we didn't plan as well for this one, and there were major power outages all over the place, and we've had to adjust how we've been living according to the power outages. I know for me, the power at my house just came back on as I am redoing this video due to the buffering issues from the last video. So I know my life has been really crazy not having electricity and having to do things from work. And I think, doing that video last night may have been the reason why I was all choppy. I don't know. Um, Anyway, it goes on to say that I wrote. It also goes on to talk about how we do things and how we do things and we are able to do without help. So I know I read that wrong. It's basically went on to say how we're able to do things and we choose to do things that we can do without help, which means, like for me, it comes to the instance of my office, the place that I'm at now recording this video. When I originally got the building, it was just a shell. I had no idea how to do electricity, how to even wire a building or anything like that. But I had a friend of mine who was proficient in doing electrical work and could do this. So with his help, we were able to, wire the entire building for electricity, put up a ceiling fan, and um, dig the trench to run it to my power line. And we did all of that ourselves versus me having to pay somebody to do it. So those are things that we find that I find that I would find difficult for me to do alone. So I would incorporate the help of somebody else. The next section is the influences of culture, and it says that the actions discusses the influence of the culture, and it is basically describing that most of our social interactions with others is considered culture, and everything about it that someone and everything about it and how that affects us as people. Sorry about that. It went on to say that most of our behavior that we have is learned through verbal language and like in dialect from the culture in which we are a part of. So what I get from that is based on the culture in which we live, the interaction that we have with in our culture causes us to act in certain ways to avoid unnecessary attention, undesirable consequences. And what that actually means is, um, when you're out in public and you're in a grocery store, just because you see somebody you know down the aisleway, it's impolite to start screaming and hollering and waving and yelling their name. You know, you work your way around, or you stop doing what you're doing and walk down and speak to that person personally, person to person, and not all the way across the building. Is social etiquette. And when you don't do that and you scream and yell across the building, you got everybody looking at you wondering, what's wrong with this crazy person. So it's just certain things we do to avoid unnecessary attention on ourselves. Um, we also tend to in one way, act in certain ways around certain people. So in the public, you'd have what I would call a public face. When you're at home with your family, you're usually the real person that you are, and 99% of your guard is let down. And when you're at work, you're using your public face. You're using a person that you're not always as straightforward, so to speak, at work, at home as you are at work. Natural selection is the next section. Natural selection is something that occurs over time and in species. It appears that as we grow older and learn new practices, we change and evolve. And what I took that to mean is, as a younger person, you may have went out and partied and did a lot of clubbing and stuff like that. And as you grow older, you realize these things are not something that really appeal to you anymore, and therefore you calm yourselves down and do more of appropriate things. Um, a role of behavioral science. Behavioral science section to me refers to the cultural practices that we participate in our environment. These behaviors that we participate in are all products of the culture environment we interact. The text discusses that these cultural practices change over time, basically depending on the cultural norm at that time. So, um, in the book, they talk about smoking, and I just know as a child when I was younger, it wasn't anywhere that we didn't go to where people didn't smoke. Restaurants, doctor's office, hospitals, anywhere we went, there was cigarette ashtrays all throughout the place. But after research proves that smoking is bad for you, now you don't see smoking hardly anywhere in society. It's not acceptable anymore. And you used to even see commercials for cigarette on TV, but you don't see that anymore. Due to this, you do not see smoking as widely as done before, and certainly not in as many places as it once was. Even though we have the right to choose and do things that we want to do, because of the laws stipulated and stuff, they still have to put labels on the items in which they sell to let everybody know what's actually in them, so that we, even if we decide to use them, we can make a conscious choice. So I guess that's why you don't see the cigarette commercials anymore, because with the health risk and stuff on that, they don't allow them to advertise on TV as strongly, but they still allow you to buy them because it's your choice. Cultural engineering. The final section discusses that we're all products of our culture, and that one culture does not make up the entire region. We may share similar dialect and other practices, but that does not mean we are all of the same culture. It appears that we take various things of different cultures and mesh them into our own. I look at it this way, that we interact with each other. As I mentioned earlier, we interact in certain ways with our friends in social settings than we do with our family and coworkers. Now, my questions are: how do you think society and social norms have reinforced a particular behavior in your life? And how do you think the norms changed your norms for the better or worse? Thanks for watching the video, and I'm sorry for the two videos, but the first one wasn't acting correctly.